but I've actually never seen this level. Like, it is truly shocking. The depravity is truly and utterly incomprehensible. All right, let's get to this Chris Kunzler video.
Because I've realized, of course, there is a very obvious answer to it, which is that there is no crime in loving life this much. There is no crime in loving life this much. There is no crime in loving life this much. There is no crime in loving life this much.
I just want to say in closing that that is one of the things that I take great hope from in this country.
I hate this man.
And it's not just that the Israelis are doing well, that you're doing well. It's that I genuinely believe that the people of this country are giving an example to the world. And I want not Israelis to compare themselves to the rest of the world. I want the rest of the developed democracies of the world.
Oh, God. Oh, no.
I want their people to compare themselves with the Israelis.
No.
Because if they...
No. A vision for a terrifying future is every Western nation going full Israel. Oh, God. Oh, please, no. Oh, my God. Oh, God, no. That is literally what people like myself, and I think even liberals really, should be fighting against tooth and nail every single step of the way. He's basically saying, by the way, it's totally appropriate for Douglas Murray to say this otherwise incredibly inappropriate thing, because this is his advocacy. He's technically morally consistent in this regard when he says, I want every other country to be just like Israel. And I'm sure that Chris will probably touch on that, because his lives advocacy up until he became this like Hasbara machine was quite literally to advocate for nationalist policies, but not in like the gay kind that they did in Germany over and over again in the pedophile island. Okay, that's literally what he like. If you look at Douglas Murray's work before like this Hasbara slant that he encountered, it was always about trying to make other Western liberal democracies more nationalist. Okay, which is precisely the reason why he's saying like we want every country to be like Israel. When he says that, he's honest. That actually corresponds to his broader vision for a dystopian future where every Western nation is just like full tilt Hitlerian.
It's them that will be found wanting.
I truly believe that Douglas Murray is one of the world's most vile extremists, and the platform which he is constantly offered by people in the media horrifies me. On the 14th of October 2023, he would write, "The Israelis will respond as they see fit. It isn't for non-Israelis to give them advice. Maybe Israel will cut off Gaza and starve Hamas out. Maybe they will have a full-scale military operation to rescue the Israeli captives. Or maybe they will finally put an end to this insoluble nightmare, raze Hamas to the ground, or clear all of the Palestinians from the benighted strip. A strip which Egypt owned but nobody wants. It could be a good time to do it." This is exactly what Israel has done. Douglas Murray says no one should tell Israel to do otherwise. He is openly endorsing genocide and ethnic cleansing. That in the many months since he penned this despicable article, Israel has done exactly that. And yet Murray had no problem and continues to have no problem with this. He delights in the...
Like Douglas Murray, if I were to describe his worldview, I would say Douglas Murray is like... he wants Adolf Hitler, but without anti-Semitism. Like he wants basically anti-Muslim Adolf Hitler. Like straight up. Down to, I would say, the eugenics. Maybe not anti-gay because he himself is gay. But he basically wants liberal Hitler. But the outgroup, the permanent outgroup is basically Muslims, and Jews are now a part of the in-group, as opposed to with Adolf Hitler's vision, obviously they were the primary enemy, right? Finally, Hitler for us. Yeah, pretty much. Like his major gripe, he is the type of dude who unironically is like almost entirely in line with Adolf Hitler, except for Adolf Hitler's primary target, the Jews. He's like, if Hitler didn't actually put Jews in concentration camps, but simply only put like socialists in concentration camps and did all of the other nationalist stuff, he would be completely in line with it. Yeah, he wants gay Adolf Hitler, liberal Hitler.
The suffering and murder of Palestinians, and this is why I could not stay silent on this man. This article alone should have seen Douglas Murray punished for incitement to genocide, because the UK is a signatory to the UN Convention on Genocide Prevention. Yet instead of this,
I mean, to be honest, if Jews were in the position today that they were in 1930s, he'd be fine with Jews as a target. Also, that is fair too. Yeah, I mean, he's just Adolf Hitler adjusted to today's material realities. Like, that is what it is.
Murray's despicable views have been mainstreamed over and over again, and this video will show you how this man is not an expert at all. He is a complete and utter moron who does nothing but genocidal propaganda for the state of Israel. Douglas Murray is such a ridiculous character, and his recent appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast was yet more proof of this, because Murray, the man who went on and on about how certain subjects should be left to experts, and that people like him had a better degree of expertise because they'd been to the region, was proved to be completely false, because his understanding and expertise on the subject of Israel and Palestine looked rather lackluster even in comparison to Dave Smith, someone who is literally a comedian. Murray's comment of "have you been to the crossings" has rightly been mocked, because Murray harps on and on about Iran in spite of the fact that he himself has never been there. So why is it one rule for Douglas and one rule for everyone else?
Yeah, or North Korea, right? I don't think he's ever been to North Korea or China. Maybe he has, I don't know.
And I think that the answer to this question is very simple.
It also is like fundamentally a stupid position to maintain, as Dave Smith correctly pointed out, which is like, well, you think the Holocaust happened, right? Like, you weren't there. How could you know? Is a perfect way to diffuse that argument. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, if you can't actually directly go and observe these observable realities, then the best you can do is obviously trust reliable resources and firsthand testimony from reliable resources. You know, reading books, that's pretty solid.
Douglas Murray likes to pretend that he is somehow far more knowledgeable than all of the left-wing college students protesting against Israel's genocide, and one of the ways that he inflates his own knowledge and understanding is by noting the fact that over the last year, he has been an Israeli propagandist. He portrays himself as this brave warrior journalist, this expert willing to say things that no one else will dare. But it's just not true. The only reason that Douglas Murray has had unparalleled access to the Gaza Strip is because he's willing to dance the exact tune of the Israeli government. There are so many Western journalists who are not incredibly pro-Palestine who have been pushing over and over again to be allowed to enter the Gaza Strip, something which Israel has denied. And they could have gone in if they were willing to go with the Israeli military, but they know that this won't be a fair account, that these will be curated scenes put in place as Israeli propaganda, and no serious journalist should think that that gives a fair account of what's going on in Palestine. But of course, for Douglas Murray, he doesn't care. He is willing to dance the exact tune of the Israeli military as long as it furthers his own personal goals. Murray's service of the Israeli genocidal machine has been so fantastic that not only was he given an award by Israel's president Isaac Herzog, but he was also allowed to go into the Gaza Strip, to the place where Yahya Sinwar was killed, for a weird little photo op. This is just honestly so bizarre when you think about the fact that most journalists are not allowed to enter the Gaza Strip because it is seen as dangerous, but the IOF are allowed to take Douglas Murray in for weird little photo ops. But what I will say about Douglas Murray is that all of the recent mockery does not go far enough. Douglas Murray is still being platformed by organisations like Times Radio, the BBC, and also Joe Rogan. And Rogan considers this man a friend. But no one should consider Douglas Murray a friend. Douglas Murray is a vile extremist. I mean, just listen to these words from one of his former colleagues who worked with him at the Henry Jackson Society, an organisation who you may know from their recent scholarship, which has largely revolved around trying to absolve Israel of its crimes and trying to cast doubt on the death toll. shithole in the Gaza Strip. Matthew Jameson, who was a former colleague of Douglas Murray's at the Henry Jackson Society, wrote, "Its associate director, the white supremacist, racist and anti-Muslim bigot Douglas Murray, is the most ugly and offensive example of this vicious, racist, anti-Muslim campaign. Mr. Murray is full of venom and hatred for Muslims. He seems to have a perverse and deranged obsession with all things Islam related. In a ghastly speech to the Dutch Parliament in 2006, Murray stated, conditions for Muslims in Europe must be made harder, and all immigration into Europe from Muslim countries must stop. There is the strong stench of fascism emanating from Douglas Murray, who is associated with the likes of racists such as Robert..."
Once again, I always say this, but like, if anyone spoke about any other group, any other marginalized group, in the way that Douglas Murray speaks about Muslims, they would be imprisoned in the countries that he operates in Europe, okay? If anyone spoke about Jews in the way that Douglas Murray speaks out about Muslims, like even a fraction of the smoke that he has for Muslims, if someone were to have for Jews broadly, okay, they would be under the prison. And virtually no one would even advocate against it other than like the most vicious anti-Semites.
Spencer, banned by the UK Home Office from entering Britain due to his status as a hate preacher, and support for former English Defence League thug leader Stephen Christopher Yaxley Lennon, known by the pseudonym Tommy Robinson. Indeed, Murray has become such a toxic political pariah that the Conservative Party front bench had to cut off relations with him. And this characterisation is correct. Douglas Murray is a seriously vile extremist with incredibly horrifying beliefs, and the first one that I want to start with, that he has repeated over and over again since October the 7th, is that Hamas are worse than the Nazis. Murray's claim hinges on two central ideas, which is that Hamas members celebrated...
I don't even think Israel is worse than the Nazis. Israel is just like the Nazis, but I don't think Israel is worse than the Nazis. Like, to make this claim about Hamas is extra crazy, because Israel is far, far, far worse than Hamas.
October the 7th, citing in particular one phone call in which an alleged member of Hamas calls his family and tells them that he'd killed Jewish people and is clearly celebrating it. And the second part is that Hamas filmed what they did on October the 7th, whereas the Nazis sought to hide their crimes. Murray's claim is stupid.
For the record, that right there, what Douglas Murray's doing is textbook Holocaust revisionism, borderline Holocaust denial, and yet, because he's doing it at the behest of defending Israel, no one ever says anything about it. Okay? No one. Okay, dude. Get the f out of here. No one. You can get away with saying whatever the f you want. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu, another great example of a out and about Holocaust revisionist, is Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu literally took away the responsibility of the Holocaust from Adolf Hitler. Okay? It is probably the maximalist Holocaust revisionism you can do. Like, there is nothing more ridiculous, because even Nazis will be like, oh, did he say he was a Nazi? Oh, was he wearing the swastika armband in the year 1939? Like, well, how can you say someone's a Nazi? But like, even Nazis won't be like, well, Adolf Hitler wasn't a Nazi. You know what I mean? Everyone knows Adolf Hitler is a Nazi, except for Benjamin Netanyahu, who famously claimed that Adolf Hitler actually didn't want to kill the Jews, but he learned that he should kill the Jews from the Palestinian Grand Mufti at the time. Okay? Like, taking away the very real anti-Semitism of Adolf Hitler in an effort to say that, like, Palestinians are more anti-Semitic is the most insane Holocaust revisionism I've ever encountered in my professional career, beyond just like straightforward denial. And it's wild because it's coming from Benjamin Netanyahu. He did say that. Yes. Why are people so shocked whenever I talk about this? Every single time I bring this up, people freak out. I'm sure Chris will bring it up eventually in this video.
For so many different reasons. But perhaps the most ridiculous part is that Israeli soldiers have filmed themselves over and over again perpetrating war crimes in the Gaza Strip. And unlike Hamas militants on October the 7th, they would have not been caught on camera anyways, because there are so many cameras littering the Gaza envelope. There is so much surveillance and CCTV. So Palestinian militants were always going to be caught on camera, whereas Israeli soldiers have openly shared war crimes on social media that have even landed some of them in legal trouble. trouble. I mean, this is what the Hind Rajab Foundation does. They go after Israeli soldiers when they're in other countries on the basis of the war crimes that they have posted on their own social media. But of course, this is from Douglas Murray, a man who doesn't actually believe that the IOF are perpetrating war crimes. He said it in this Times interview.
Well, if the IDF was, for instance, deliberately massacring civilians, that would obviously be a war crime and would not be correct, but it hasn't happened.
That's the line.
Whose?
I'm asking you, that's your line.
Well, if Israel were committing war crime after war crime, then that would be a line, but it's not.
And this is why the claim is so ridiculous, because based on what Murray is saying, the IOF are much worse than the Nazis. The Palestinian journalist Yunus Tirawi recently posted a photo of Israeli soldier Matan Ben David, who belongs to the Golani Reconnaissance Brigade, who you will know because they were responsible for the massacre of 15 aid workers and then burying them in a mass grave to hide the crimes that they had perpetrated. Well, on the 28th of March, after the massacre was committed, Matan Ben David posted a photo of him in Rafah with the caption, "Until next time, you son of a bitch." And in the background, you can see the place where the mass grave was dug. He posted his war crimes on Facebook. How is this not worse than what the Nazis did? The same could be said for the plethora of images.
Yeah, also, this like psychosexual obsession that the IDF has is like beyond the pale. I know that there are a lot of people throughout periods of war that have engaged in similar acts, but I've actually never seen this level. Like, this is, maybe it's because of the ready availability of social media, but it is shocking. It is truly shocking. The depravity is truly and utterly incomprehensible, and the world is just turning a blind eye to this. Like, god damn, dude. This is why I always say it's a big part of people assuming that, like, well, Israel's not that bad, it genuinely comes from mainstream media not reporting on this shit. Okay, can you imagine Hamas militants entering kibbutzim on October 7 and wearing the underwear of the Jewish women that they had just killed inside of their homes? How much would Israel parade that propaganda around? How much would Israel actually show that? You would still hear about it today. They talk about things that didn't happen on October 7 and act like it did and still repeat it over and over again in an effort to justify their 19-month genocide campaign. Oof.
Images of Israeli soldiers posing in the underwear and lingerie of displaced or murdered Palestinian women, or the constant images of Palestinians stripped to their underwear, blindfolded and handcuffed. These images are crimes in of themselves, and they are taken with the specific purpose of sexually humiliating Palestinians, and they are proudly shared by Israeli soldiers. How on earth can you sit there and say, well, Hamas are worse than the Nazis for doing this, when the country that you support and are clearly very supportive of every single member of the Israeli military, how can you sit there and pretend that they are not worse than the Nazis if this is genuinely what you believe? There are all of these Israeli Telegram channels who react to the same images of slaughtered Palestinian women, children, and men who are mutilated in horrifying ways with gleeful delight that you can see from the emojis that they comment under some of the most unspeakable images. Or you have this recent Haaretz article which showed how Israelis were icing eclairs with the phrase, "Let the IOF mow them down." It is utterly ridiculous to sit there and make claims like this. In fact, Murray tries to say that no Israeli soldiers have enjoyed what they have done in the Gaza Strip.
No Israeli soldier I have spoken to ever wanted to go and see the Gaza again. Okay? Nobody wanted to go back. They were dragged back because of Hamas's action.
Oh, damn, dude. Those poor genocidal Nazi soldiers, dude. I feel so bad for them. I feel so bad for them, don't you? Perhaps there should be more think pieces written about how sad they felt as they assassinated children. We haven't gotten enough.
It's just not true. There are clearly very many fanatics who have gone into Gaza and had a great time murdering innocent civilians there. And a trick that Murray and many people like him like to play is claiming that once upon a time Israel was this really peaceful and loving place, but then after October the 7th they became jaded and really violent towards Palestinians. Well, in the 2010s, Israelis were making pancakes with the face of Rachel Corrie, an international activist who was crushed to death by an Israeli bulldozer, put on these pancakes. How can you possibly sit there and act as if Israelis are so upset about what they do? They don't care.
They have celebrated the extermination and expulsion of Palestinians since their state was founded. Their concept of Independence Day is based on the ethnic cleansing of 750,000 people and the destruction of more than 500 villages. And I'm also very perplexed by this claim because of one example that Douglas Murray draws from in his book to prove that the Nazis weren't proud of their crimes. And this comes from Heinrich Himmler's Posen speech. And what Himmler said was that we can talk about it among ourselves, yet we will never speak out of it in public. I am referring to the evacuation of the Jews, the extermination of the Jewish people. It is a page of glory in our history that has never been written and is never to be written. Murray goes on to say, Himmler and his SS were among the most evil people in human history, yet even they sought to cover over their crimes. Here in 2020...
I think one of the craziest parts about this commentary from Douglas Murray is that it doesn't actually apply for Hamas, because I think he's trying to, I know he's trying to say, like, even the Nazis tried to hide their exterminationist policies in shame, but given the confines of what Israel is doing versus what Hamas did on October 7, okay, Israel is closer to is closer in its tactics, in its mechanization of death and destruction to the Nazis, and therefore and they're seemingly not hiding their shame about it either. They post about it. So, like, this is more befitting of Israel. And it's not even a position that I would take, but I think it's a position that Douglas Murray would have to take if he was actually honest about it. If he truly thought that, like, the shamelessness displayed about wanton murder, death, and destruction was indicative of someone being worse than the Nazis, and I know that's the point that Chris is trying to make here, then he would say that Israel is worse.
23 in the form of Hamas were people who were boasting of their crimes, were proud of their crimes, and indeed wanted to broadcast their crimes for the world to see. But is this not just a bizarre quote for Douglas Murray to choose? Because Himmler is clearly proud of his crimes. He says it is a page of glory in German history. He is not upset about what they've done, and he is speaking to many SS officers. What he is saying is, yeah, we're not going to broadcast it to the public, but still they should be proud of killing that many Jewish people, a far grander number than those
Even that in and of itself is actually pretty similar to Israel as well, which is precisely the reason why Israel tries to kill journalists, right? Like, there is no discipline amongst the ranks in terms of, like, scaling back their soldiers from posting stuff like this, like posting their own war crimes and shit. Having said that, Israel still is also trying to maintain a blackout. Israel's still trying to maintain, like, a historical blackout by murdering every journalist it possibly can without, like, additional scrutiny from the Western world. And seemingly the Western world, at least, like, the people in positions of power, are not all that interested in stopping Israel.
Killed on October the 7th. But what's also particularly ridiculous about this, and is noted in a Time magazine article about how dangerous this comparison really is in terms of altering the history of the Holocaust, what it says is the Nazis didn't want to broadcast their crimes to potential victims because this could have increased resistance. And seemingly, The Ghetto Fights, a piece written by Marek Edelman, one of the few surviving leaders of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, affirms exactly this. Because what Edelman notes is that they had a hard time trying to convince Jewish people to adopt resistance against the Nazis because many of them did not actually believe that Jewish people were being taken to camps for extermination. Even though Jewish people were disappearing, they did not believe that Germans would have actually murdered them for absolutely no reason. So if the Nazis were to have published their crimes, this would have completely got in the way of their plans to mass exterminate millions of Jewish people. And it's yet another flaw of this comparison. Murray is saying that Hamas and the Nazis are exactly the same because both of their victims were Jewish people, but he doesn't go into any details, he doesn't know any of the context, and so as you can see, making the claim, well, Hamas filmed it and that means they are worse, is just utterly ridiculous because it's clearly a very different context. But something that is also particularly noticeable about citing Himmler's Posen speech is that when you look at the full thing, Himmler is basically saying that his SS men are moral beings because they have managed to stay decent and not steal individually from Jewish people to enrich themselves. So sitting there and saying, well, Hamas are actually worse than the Nazis because they filmed themselves is really bizarre to have chosen this quote, because Murray is doing something pretty similar to Heinrich Himmler. He is moralizing the crimes of the Nazis, regardless of his willingness to call them evil, to say that the Nazis were bad. Murray is moralizing what the Nazis did in a very similar vein to what Heinrich Himmler wanted to do. And I would bear in mind here that the Nazis exterminated 6 million Jewish people. They wanted to exterminate every Jewish person on Earth. And so I think sitting here and saying that Hamas are far more evil than them is a pretty outrageous claim to make. It is pretty dangerous in terms of the history of the Holocaust. But Murray has clearly learnt his lesson from his masters over in Tel Aviv, because Benjamin Netanyahu has done this himself. In 2015, Netanyahu made the frankly outrageous and ridiculous claim that Hajj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, had actually been the one to give Hitler the idea to exterminate the Jewish people.
He had a central role.
There you go, chatters. Listen, I trust my boy Chris on this. You know what I'm saying? I trust him. And here it is.
In fomenting the final solution, he flew to Berlin. Hitler didn't want to exterminate the Jews at the time. He wanted to expel the Jews. And Hajj Amin al-Husseini went to Hitler and said, if you expel them, they'll all come here. So what should I do with them? He asked. You said, burn them.
Netanyahu would go on to...
Yeah, famously, Adolf Hitler loved hearing from brown people like that. He was a big fan. Yeah, he just got duped. Adolf Hitler, not like that anti-Semitic that he wants to kill all the Jews, but simply was urged by the British by the British colonial occupation's chosen Arab leader, okay, at a time when Palestinians were fighting alongside England against Adolf Hitler, for the record. Yeah, it's crazy.
Retract these claims because it is obviously an outrageous fabrication, but still it shows you why people like Douglas Murray do it. To make the Palestinians look like they are even more evil than the Nazis, to justify what Israel does to them. And the Israeli historian Tom Segev noted the same thing in the 1990s, long before Netanyahu had come to power. He states, at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Israel, an entire wall is dedicated to the Mufti, and according to him, the visitor is left to conclude that there is much in common between the Nazis' plan to destroy the Jews and the Arabs' enmity towards Israel. And so
This, by the way, is straight up what Norm talks about, or at least part of what Norm talks about in, I think it was called Holocaust Inc. In his book, where he covers like how Zionists will utilize not Holocaust Inc. Sorry, Holocaust Industry, where the Zionists will engage in even like a false interpretation, even in Holocaust revisionism at times, to basically defend Israel's exterminationist policies against Muslims and Arabs, Palestinians in general. It's crazy. Yes, Israel lost, but they won. They won by being up on the main stage and getting all the way up to the second position. I don't care. Eurovision. Eurovision can suck my dick. The very fact that they allowed Israel to participate while Israel is quite literally destroying Palestinians once again and escalated his attacks on the Gaza Strip once again is disgusting. It's depraved. It is once again showcasing the inconsistencies. It's once again showcasing the inconsistencies with like liberal democratic society, the Western world, which has this entitled position as like champions of liberalism, champions of democracy. And yet very clearly they don't give a shit about any of those things because they can't even aesthetically do the bare minimum. Okay? Aesthetically do the bare minimum to say F you to Israel and to refuse to allow Israel to compete. It's not even a European country. But even then, they expelled Russia. They expelled Russia without a single thought. Okay? They said F you to Russia in participating in these global affairs. You don't get to whitewash and launder your reputation after you violated the sovereignty of Ukrainians, which is fair, okay? But god damn, the fact that you can't even show a little bit of decency, a little bit of intellectual honesty, a little bit of moral consistency and say, okay, well, we can't have Israel participate in this goddamn competition. They're literally doing a genocide. Is disgusting. It's depraved. Yes, the German Broadcaster Union literally said if Eurovision excluded Israel, it would destroy the entire event because they're gross. They're gross. None of that will change the reality that Israel is doing a genocide and that most of the Western world is horrified at Israel's actions. Okay? everyday citizens despise Israel for good reason. Everyday citizens. It doesn't matter. You can sing songs and dance and participate in Eurovision all day, every day. That is not going to change the reality. The reality that Israel is doing a genocide. It is the worst crime against humanity that you can commit, and that people are waking up to said reality and understandably despise Israel, and that Israel is a pariah, and it will forever be a pariah, forever tarnished by these actions that are taking place. You can rig the votes all day, every day. It does not change the reality. You say Israel won the popular vote in Britain. Guess what? In Britain, in the UK, in England specifically, there were hundreds of thousands of people on the streets today protesting for Palestinians, protesting for an end to the genocide. What do you think is more consequential? What do you think matters more? Think about the anger and resentment that you feel right now for the very fact that Israel was allowed to participate in Eurovision. Do you think that that feeling of resentment doesn't carry over to millions of people in the Western world, people that know right from wrong, people that can see the devastating nature of Israel's bloodthirsty ambition in Gaza? Of course they do. So all this stuff only creates more of a fissure between these institutions, our governments, and the population. Israel is a suicide cult, and it feels like Western liberal democracies are going to go down with the ship rather than tackle this issue head on. Yeah, look at that. The angel of death is a surprisingly fitting image for Israel. It's disgusting.
There is this long historical precedent of Zionists making outrageous claims about the Holocaust which serve to diminish and distort its legacy, all because they want to condemn Palestinians. Murray's comments are also really eerie when you consider that this guy referred to the Germans' crimes during the Second World War as mucking up.
But I see no reason why every other country in the world should be prevented from feeling pride in itself because the Germans mucked up twice in a century.
He also...
Yeah, he's talking about nationalism there. He's like, don't let the Germans' failures of like killing Jews, because that's the only problem he has here with the Nazi Germany crimes, is the fact that they put Jews in the crosshairs. Like that's literally what he's referencing. Okay. And what he's saying is like, don't let the Germans mucking up by targeting Jews get in the way of recreating nationalistic fervor in the West.
Associates with some really problematic figures. In a recent interview with GB News, he went on and on about how the French philosopher Renaud Camus had been banned from the UK.
I see that the British government's decision to bar him from even entering the UK as absolutely typical of British reaction to this.
But what he didn't say was why Camus had actually been banned. And the reason he was banned was because he was going to speak at a Homeland Party rally. And if you don't know who they are an extremist far-right organisation with a long history of anti-Semitism and neo-Nazism. So why would Douglas Murray go out to bat for these people? He's ostensibly a defender of Jewish people. And he is most definitely inverting the history of the Holocaust by claiming that the Nazis were incredibly ashamed of what they had done. Edward B. Westerman's article, Literally Drunk on Genocide, How the Nazis Celebrated Murdering Jews, is filled with horrifying examples of the Nazis celebrating their crimes publicly. For example, in 1942, he notes how a Gestapo official at a celebration pinned a beer coaster with the number 1000 written on it to his blouse. He did this to celebrate his 1000th execution of a Jewish person. Murray even tries to claim in one of his interviews that the Nazis drunk solely because they were upset about the crimes that they had done.
Even the Nazis were actually ashamed of what they did. You know, SS battalions who spent their days shooting Jews in the back of the head and pushing them.
Yeah, he's not a defender of Jews. He's a defender of Israel. Exactly. He's not a Jewish defender. He's an Israel enabler. Huge difference. Exactly. And the reason why he enables Israel is not because he loves the Jews or wants to defend them or anything. It's because on principle, Israel is a fascist, nationalist, ethno-state that is engaging in exterminationist policies against Muslims and Arabs. And that's what he likes. That's why he says the West should resemble Israel.
into trenches had to get very, very drunk in the evening to forget what they had done.
And Edward B.
poor
Westerman's
Nazis.
article provides a very different picture of this.
Can you imagine if someone like myself, can you imagine if I engaged in the role reversal and I was talking about how like, oh, the Nazis actually felt bad about what they were doing as opposed to Israel. Oh my God, dude. First of all, it would be ridiculous for me to say that. Okay. Make no mistake. But oh my God, imagine how valid it would be, partially, okay, but also how much hay would be made out of that. Oh my God, people would be like, we have to throw him in jail like tomorrow. We have to throw him in jail yesterday. People, and by the way, make no mistake, they already they already demand my imprisonment. They already demand my imprisonment when I don't say stuff like that, when I objectively combat anti-Semitism.
What Westerman says is that drinking incentivized and rewarded murder. It promoted disinhibition to facilitate killing and acted as a coping mechanism. So its use as a coping mechanism was but one part. It was also a tool of celebration. But Murray, again, did not care about this when it could be used to demonize Palestinians. Or you could highlight this example from Time magazine's article, which I mentioned earlier. It states, contrary to some claims being made in 2023, many Nazi perpetrators took delight in torturing their victims. The killers themselves, in any case, did not shy away from crowing about their crimes in official documents. Mobile Killing Squad commander Franz Stahlecker sent a report to Berlin in January of 1942, proudly proclaiming that his unit had killed 118,000 Jews. He included a map of the Baltic states with coffins drawn in each one and the annotation that Estonia was Jew-free. This unit alone killed more than 100,000 Jewish people, and Douglas Murray wants you to believe that the Palestinians and Hamas are more evil than this. And this is why I am so set on the idea that Douglas Murray is a really dangerous extremist who is willing to say anything. He literally just uses anti-Semitism to further his own arguments, his own personal brand, and also to justify the extermination of tens of thousands of innocent people in the Middle East. The final point that I want to make on this topic is that it is in of itself utterly ridiculous and unscholarly to compare Hamas to the Nazis on the basis of the fact that both of their victims were Jewish people. And this touches on something far wider than Douglas Murray, but I think the reality is that most Westerners have no idea what the Nazis actually thought. They actually just think in the kind of terms that Murray does in this book, that the Nazis were just evil and they killed Jewish people because of that. And of course the Nazis held horrifying beliefs and did unspeakable things. However, why the Nazis actually did it is just a mystery to most people, and many people have played a part in this. The philosopher Todd McGowan focuses on Hollywood as having played a big role in this. He focuses on Steven Spielberg's Indiana Jones films. He notes how Indiana Jones refers to snakes and Nazis in very similar terms. McGowan writes, for Spielberg, the evil of Nazis is at the same level as that of snakes. They are no more a political danger than snakes are. They are instead a natural danger that we must reckon with, not a political project that we have to counter with another kind of politics. And whilst this is a microcosm of it, so many people think in this kind of way. They don't actually care or know what the Nazis thought. And this is why you can make a stupid comparison like this with almost no evidence, because when you think about it, what the Nazis actually believed was an extremist version of identity politics. They believed that the German nation had been degraded by other unpure races, and that in order to reach a period of harmony, they needed to destroy many of these races and target those who had damaged German society. And there were many people who were targeted because of this. You had different ethnic groups like Slavic people, you had political groups, gay people, disabled people, and you also, of course, had the Jewish people. In particular, the Jewish person in Nazi propaganda was always seen as the worst, because what Nazis would say is that they were parasitic, that they could insert themselves into any Western society, pretend to be like that society, and then destroy it from within. And how is this similar to what Hamas says? Hamas have affirmed over and over again that their war is not against all Jewish people, but the state of Israel. Yes, there may be members of Hamas and senior figures who hold and have held anti anti-Semitic beliefs, but primarily Hamas is an organization that draws its legitimacy and has its ideology grounded in resistance to Israeli occupation. If Israel hadn't occupied the Gaza Strip and brutalized the people there for decades, Hamas would have no legitimacy. Notice that when they won an election was just after 2005, when Israel had withdrawn, and Hamas could frame themselves as having driven Israel out of the Gaza Strip. The appeal to Palestinians wasn't a Nazi-like hatred of Jewish people that was anti-Semitic. It was the idea that there was someone who was going to resist against Israel's occupation militarily. Palestinian resistance predates even the State of Israel, and there are a multitude of different reports, most notably, in my opinion, the King Crane Commission, organized by the US and headed by an American academic and a professor who went to Palestine and surveyed people there and said that it was a terrible idea to build a Jewish state in the land of another people because it would always require force in order to maintain, and that is all Israel has ever been. It has required massive force against the indigenous people of Palestine who don't want to be oppressed, who don't want to live as second or third class citizens in their historic homeland. But this is always what is discarded from Murray's thought. He doesn't want you to ever question, well, actually, what did the Nazis believe? What do Hamas believe? Because he just wants you to think that they are barbarous monsters who kill because they're all evil and crazy and are in a death cult, as he likes to say. And I will also note, as Martin Shaw, the scholar of genocide studies, has, on October the 7th, Israelis were not targeted primarily as Jewish people. They were targeted as Israelis. They were targeted because they live in land that once upon a time belonged to Palestinians before they were ethnically cleansed and before that subjugated and broken by the British Empire and its colonial regime. And that is why on October the 7th you had over 70 foreign nationals, predominantly Thai workers, who were targeted by Hamas, and also a number which I have struggled to find of Palestinian citizens of Israel who were killed on October the 7th by Hamas. And I know that someone who thinks they're clever is going to say, well, does this mean that the Nazis didn't hate Jewish people because they had many other victims? No, because the thing is entirely different. The Nazis exterminated Jewish people, as I noted, because they were portrayed as a parasite responsible for the degradation of German society and the decline that it was experiencing, whereas Palestinians are fighting against Israel and killing Israelis, including civilians, directly as a result of Israeli occupation. You cannot sit there and claim that these two things are the same. It doesn't necessarily mean that killing vast amounts of civilians and perpetrating war crimes is acceptable, but what it does show you is comparing these two things is ridiculous, and it serves to obfuscate what the Nazis actually believed. And in a time of rising fascism, how is this a good idea when there are more and more people who target Jewish people? Why are you doing this? And literally, the whole reason that Douglas Murray is doing this is to spread pro-Israel propaganda and to make it so that Palestinians are dehumanized and are worthy of extermination. This is something that Seth Anzisko wrote about in his book, Preventing Palestine, in 2019. He noted how Menachem Begin, when Israel was on the brink of invading Lebanon, consistently referred to Yasser Arafat as a two-legged beast and stated that if Israel did not invade Lebanon, there would be another Treblinka, an extermination camp where 1 million Jewish people were killed. And they did this to dehumanize the Palestinians and exclude them from polite society and participating in politics, because no one wants to deal with Nazis. But perhaps the starkest of all the warnings came from the Israeli Boaz Evron in the 1980s, who wrote against the direct comparison between Palestinian ire towards Israel and Nazi anti-Semitism. Evron would say, a leadership cannot be detached from its propaganda as a reflection of reality. Thus the leadership begins to act within a world of myths and monsters of its own creation.
I think Evron's words are also particularly poignant when discussing what Douglas Murray thinks and says about Palestine and Palestinians, because as you can see, he notes that the Israeli leadership ends up existing in a world that is not real. And Douglas Murray does exactly the same thing. He tries to tell people that the IOF do not commit war crimes. He never talks about starvation. He blames everything squarely on the Palestinians without ever discussing the issue of Israeli settlement of Palestinian territory and the increasingly abusive policies that Palestinians are subjected to. It is not dealing with a real or factual world. It is existing, as Evron said, within a world of myths and monsters.
And I think that if Evron could have seen how much worse it has gotten than 1980, he would be vindicated in what he had said and horrified, because Israeli society is currently in very vast support of expelling 2 million Palestinians. They agree with Trump's plan to ethnically cleanse Gaza. They also have continually supported Israel's genocide in the Gaza Strip and have in fact said that Israel should go further. either. And this is why I say Douglas Murray is a vile extremist and a dangerous Israeli propagandist. He is spreading wicked propaganda to vast audiences in the West with increasingly larger platforms. He's welcomed on Joe Rogan, The Times, BBC recently even, to spread this kind of stuff. And this is exactly what is leading to the extermination of tens of thousands of Palestinians, the starvation of 2 million people, which, by the way, Douglas Murray doesn't even seem to care about commenting on. And as I say, this man claims that it is Israeli soldiers who are the real victims.
First of all, your characterization of the slaughter, it's horrible. It's horrible that young Israelis have to go in yet again to Gaza and try to find Israeli hostages and try to get the leadership of Hamas.
That's what's horrible about it?
It is not the case. Yes, because I think there's a consequence to starting wars.
He is deranged. This is poisonous and foul rhetoric. And I just want to close this section on Douglas Murray's Holocaust revisionism and the way in which he is effectively doing apologia for the Nazis in service of Israeli propaganda with talking about how on Joe Rogan's podcast, Douglas Murray went on and on about Joe Rogan and Dave Smith attacking them for revising the history of World War II, condemning them for opening the sluice gates on the right and looking into the sewers and such. But Murray is also incredibly guilty of this, because Murray constantly traffics in the Great Replacement Theory. Now, if you don't know what the Great Replacement Theory is, it is the idea that one day white people within Western society will be outnumbered by migrants, and it is always unwilling to confront the fact that the white birth rate is declining, and we are bringing people over here because of the rapacious march of capitalism. And if you want that to change, you should probably be arguing against capitalism, rather than claiming that, first of all, Muslims are responsible for the degradation of our society, and also that we would easily be able to survive without this migration. But the reason that I bring this up is because the Great Replacement Theory has inspired...
Is also a Nazi conspiracy theory, because who's doing this change is always answered with the Jews. The Jews are doing the Great Replacement. That's what's so funny about Douglas Murray and his endless defense of Israel, while simultaneously trafficking in conspiracy theories that are directly anti-Semitic by advocating for historical movements that are responsible for the largest number of Jews being slaughtered.
Inspired a multitude of different mass killers. For example, Anders Behring Breivik, who killed 7...
By the way, the way I see it is this is no different than Richard Spencer. Richard Spencer, as you guys know, is an out and about open neo-Nazi, right? He is a anti-Semitic neo-Nazi. And Richard Spencer also loves Israel. He wants whites to have Israel in America. He has actively said that. He's like, I see no issue with the way Israel exists. I just want Israel to exist here in the United States. That's it.
77 people in Norway, and Brenton Tarrant, who killed 51 Muslims in Christchurch, with his manifesto being titled The Great Replacement Theory. And this is particularly noticeable when it comes to Douglas Murray being the defender of all Jewish...
Go back to what you used to say in the chat. I got my duck stuck in a vacuum today. What? No, it's not linked to Nazis at all. The Great Replacement Theory, it 100% is what? What are you saying? Hasanabi law. How do you not know where Sam Cedar is? He hasn't left Brooklyn in 3 years. What are people saying in this chat? What the fuck is going on? It's illegal to either own or read that manifesto here in New Zealand.
People, because the Great Replacement Theory is not in of itself anti-Semitic. However, there are people who have blended this with anti-Semitism to claim that this is a plan orchestrated by Jewish billionaires to destroy and degrade white Western European society. And 3 examples of this are Robert Bowers, who killed 11 people at an American synagogue in 2018, John Ernest, who killed 1 Jewish person at a synagogue in 2019, and Stefan Balliet, a German who killed 2 Jewish people at a synagogue. And all of these people espoused a form of the Great Replacement Theory that is blended with anti-Semitism. Now, I'm not saying that Douglas Murray is directly responsible for this, but if you are willing to sit there and condemn Dave Smith and Joe Rogan, probably rightly so for what they're up to. I mean, I actually have no idea what they're really talking about, because I'm not an avid watcher of Joe Rogan, but I'm sure that he is engaged in some bizarre conspiracy theories, which are dangerous. But what Murray does is also open the sluice gate, because Murray has no problem with praising Viktor Orban, and Viktor Orban also espouses the Great Replacement replacement theory, and he does not always do it, but what he does do is that he does sometimes condemn George Soros in particular for having been an orchestrator of migrants coming to Hungary, being weaponized to destroy the country and Christendom, and Murray constantly praises him. And so just like the topic of being expert, it is one rule for Douglas Murray and one rule for the rest of us. He can traffic in dangerous conspiracies, he can go on and on about the Great Replacement theory, he can refer to the Holocaust as mucking up, associate with people who have undeniably espoused anti-Semitic views, as long as they support Israel. It's as simple as that, because these people are not concerned about anti-Semitism. I will keep on repeating this. Douglas Murray only uses it as a means to further his own arguments, enrich himself, and condemn left-wing protesters. He is nothing more than a bigot himself, who does not want to see any meaningful change, who does not want to see emancipation and equality for all human beings. All he wants is the maintenance of the current status quo, until it can be worsened and become more oppressive for people who are not white.
I'm not an expert on this. I'm an expert on this, and I have views. I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert on this, but I'm going to talk about it non-stop. It's a bit weird to be simultaneously saying I'm not an expert on a conflict and talking about it everywhere.
Wait a minute,
I'm
what
not
about
an expert,
just-
but I'm talking all the time about
but
this.
you're not-
Have more experts around. People who have appointed themselves experts, who are not experts. If these people are such experts who thinks he's an expert, you're insisting that you're an expert, or not claiming you're an expert.
Now, as I mentioned, Douglas Murray's debate with Dave Smith largely revolved around the idea that there were certain people who were experts with authority, who did the actual legwork, who went to the region, people like Douglas Murray, the brave warrior journalist. But is this really what Murray is? As I mentioned, this man is no brave warrior journalist. He has been doing propaganda for Israel and its military. He is not some kind of brave man. He is someone who has been into Gaza to look on the suffering of Palestinian people with the Israeli military, the people currently inflicting that on the Palestinians. But on the topic of Douglas Murray's expertise, as I have shown with his claims about Hamas being worse than the Nazis, this guy is not an expert, he's not even a good scholar, but his new book on democracy and death cults is yet another example of how ridiculous the claim that Douglas Murray is some kind of expert that we should listen to really is. Now, if you're looking for a really succinct breakdown of Douglas Murray's terrible new book, then I would highly recommend this piece in Current Affairs by Nathan J. Robinson. There's also a YouTube video of him talking about very similar things, but this breakdown is really good, and in part I will draw on it, because I have not read all of Douglas Murray's book. However, I have looked through certain parts of it and checked all of the claims that Robinson is making, because some of them seem utterly outrageous, and I'll go into detail about them. But there is one part which really leapt out to me, and this actually came from a Times Radio interview with Douglas Murray, where he was talking about the fact that he had visited one of Israel's maximum security torture dungeons.
You also visit an Israeli prison for captured Hamas fighters in the book. You say you spent hours there, but you don't quote anybody there. You don't paraphrase anybody there. You say, although I saw people I knew from the atrocity videos, there was nothing to learn from them. Why are Palestinian voices so absent from this book?
Now, in of itself, visiting an Israeli torture dungeon is bad enough, because in any decent society, anyone who enters into a space like that, where systemic torture, whether that is sexual, physical, or mental, is used every single day against people, to the point where prisoners have to have limbs amputated because the handcuffs that Israelis use on them are so tight, and they beat Palestinians and don't let them go to the bathroom, so they end up defecating on themselves. Well, anyone who goes into a space like that, they should be going to The Hague. If you are doing propaganda, you should be behind a glass box, because that is not a normal space that needs to be spoken about. Many of the people in Israel's torture dungeons have never been tried. They are held under administrative detention, and young Palestinians, such as a 17-year-old from the West Bank who was never tried, recently died due to severe abuse and neglect in Israeli jails. He had so many illnesses that came from his treatment, and Murray doesn't once mention anything about the level of brutality in these Israeli torture dungeons. He actually looks at the Palestinians there and says that they are humiliated. It is really quite something, and Murray went to one of the highest security ones, where no doubt the abuse is particularly bad. And when you consider that you have more than 60 Palestinians who have been executed inside these torture dungeons, whether that is through sadistic abuse or neglect, It is a truly horrifying thing. You have cases like Dr. Adnan al-Bursh, who was never actually charged with a crime, and yet he was found beaten severely, naked from the waist down. He was murdered, and his body has never been released, and people have speculated that perhaps he was tortured to death sexually. And is this really an outrageous speculation to make when you have the case of a Palestinian who was gang raped by Israeli soldiers on camera, where he had items inserted inside of him that caused damage to the point where he needed surgery? And I think it's worth here going back to the fact that Murray claims most Israelis begrudgingly enter the Gaza Strip, that they don't celebrate the things that they do to Palestinians. Well, of course, you first of all had a riot, a January 6th style event, where Israelis attempted to break into an Israeli torture camp to get the people charged of these crimes out. But you also had Hanoch Milwitsky, a member of Netanyahu's Likud party, who in a discussion with Ahmed Tipi, a Palestinian member of the Israeli Knesset, who was asking was it legitimate to use sexual torture on Palestinians, stated, if he is a Nukhba, which is an elite member of Hamas's fighting force.
By the way, all of this is stuff that many people in this community are equipped with, like the knowledge that many people in this community are equipped with. All of this is knowledge that I'm equipped with, which is why when I make the calculation and I say things about Israel and Israeli society or what Israel has become, like this is the knowledge that I'm operating off of. It's not like, it's not out of nowhere, okay? Lying, boo-hoo, lying. And that's what it is. The only thing people can say in the face of these realities, because they are so atrocious on their own, is to claim, no, that didn't happen. Because this right here openly shows that even this person that wants to defend Israel recognizes right from wrong, okay? The reason why they have to say, oh, this is a lie, is because if it's true, then the revulsion that people feel towards Israel is valid. It's also ridiculous to say this is a lie because everything is on camera. There's CCTV footage over it. Like every single thing that Chris just mentioned was broadly covered in Israeli media and never covered in Western media. And the reason for why it was never covered in Western media or was simply mentioned as an afterthought is because if it was covered accurately in Western media, Western society would fall apart because you like living with this knowledge in your mind and seeing your politicians still offer unconditional support to this country that's doing this sort of shit is unimaginable. It undermines democracy in and of itself. Okay? It doesn't even end there. The main rapist became a television personality in the process. He unmasked himself in this final act and then became a TV personality. He was like hosting TV shows on Israeli television.
Everything is legitimate, everything. He did not deny the gang rape had occurred. In fact, he said it was legitimate. Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's Minister of National Security.
Even what he's talking about here was also on camera. The Knesset had an emergency meeting and the dude from the Likud party actively yelled in the Knesset meeting saying that it is legitimate to do rapes to these Palestinians in the concentration camp. Like he said it. And the reality is, like, he shouldn't feel a sense of shame at all in Israeli society. Why should he feel a sense of shame in Israeli society? When you look at the broader attitudes demonstrated in Israeli society towards Palestinians, of course he's not going to feel shame saying this shit.
Referred to these people as heroes. He has spoken consistently about his own pride over the horrifying conditions that he has instituted in these torture camps. Is this really congruent with Murray's idea that all Israelis wanted to do is dance, that they are the lovers of life fighting against an evil death cult? Because Murray is set on the idea that extreme actions of violence on October the 7th, some of which happened and some of which didn't happen, indict the entire Palestinian population as a death cult. But Israel, a place where systemic sexual torture and abuse is clearly government policy, well, he thinks they're the good and moral people who we should be allied with. And Murray claims that the Palestinians that he saw inside the Israeli torture camp were 100% people who committed crimes on October the 7th. They were in videos, he claims. But there weren't that many people captured on October the 7th, and these people are held in tiny cells which are very overcrowded, where they are kept blindfolded and handcuffed all day. So how could Murray actually tell who these people were? And a recent Haaretz article cast doubt into this, because not only does it note the sadistic torture inflicted at the Yemen field torture camp, where he also notes that his superiors referred to it as a cemetery because so many people were being killed in it, but he also notes that the narrative that all of the people there were Nukhba terrorists was just not true. They were torturing innocent people before they were interrogated. Murray claims that there was nothing to be learnt from these evil Nukhba terrorists, that they were not even worth looking at or speaking to. They were just pure evil. But are the people who consistently torture not only these people alleged to have committed crimes, but also people who are innocent and people who have non-violently resisted Israeli occupation, which is illegal under international law? Are their torturers not monstrously evil? I mean, there are many Israelis who have spoken about this. You could read Ari Shavitz on Gaza Beach, where he himself starts to see the comparison between what he is doing and what the Nazis did to Jewish people themselves. But Murray thinks that that's just not something that his readers need to hear or something that is worth mentioning for him, because Murray is no expert. He presents one side, and he does this with the specific goal of justifying the extermination of Palestinians. And not only does Murray choose to leave out certain parts of what is happening in Palestine so as to maintain his narrative, he sometimes just outright lies. When he discusses his visit to the Israeli torture dungeons, he has this to say. He states that conditions in Israeli jails were pretty good before October the 7th, fairly relaxed. This is just a ridiculous lie. There is no other way to put it. There is no truth to what...
Sexual violence was systematic in Israeli detention centers before October 7 as well. Plenty of reporting has been conducted on the matter.
Murray is saying there are so many articles which detail horrific abuse by Israelis of Palestinians inside their prisons long before October the 7th. You have On Gaza Beach, which is from the First Intifada, when horrific violence was used against Palestinians during that period. And you also have this article from the Sunday Times in 1977, where they talk about Israel's systemic torture of Palestinians. And this part has always horrified me. When it was realised that he had lied, Eddie repeatedly banged Abdul Karim's head against a rough wall. Pieces of plaster fell out, and Orly told him to swallow them, which he did. "If I had anything, I would give it to you," Abdul Karim kept telling his interrogators. They did not believe him. He was kept under a cold shower, jammed into a barrel of freezing water, and suspended from his wrists once more, while the interrogator Orly squeezed his genitals. This is violent torture and sexual abuse detailed by the Sunday Times in 1977. To claim that Israeli jails had been relaxed prior to October the 7th is a complete and utter lie. And also, I will note something here. Douglas Murray doesn't mention Itamar Ben-Gvir's name. He just says the minister in charge of those prisons. He makes an active choice not to mention Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's Minister of National Security, who controls the country's police and prisons, because Murray loves to harp on about how Palestinians are religious extremists who kill for fun and believe that it is some kind of divine plan, pleasing God. And I'm sure that you could find examples of Palestinians who believe this, but one thing I can tell you is that this is completely what Itamar Ben-Gvir believes. Ben-Gvir is a disciple of Rabbi Meir Kahane, a man who tried to introduce bills to the Israeli Knesset that were strikingly similar to the Nuremberg laws, according to another member of the Israeli Knesset, and someone who advocated for expelling every Palestinian. So why are you choosing to omit his name in your book? This cannot be seen as good scholarly work, because this is done exclusively with the goal of pushing the narrative that Palestinians are radical, monstrous extremists, whereas Israelis are rational, good people who just want to dance, when this is just not true. Many Israelis, like Ben-Gvir, revel in torturing Palestinians. I would say that when it comes to Douglas Murray's new book, you could gain the same level of knowledge by watching Instagram slop reels from people like Hen Mazig, Lizzie Savetsky, and Noah Tishby. It is literally just Instagram reel slop content that claims outrageous things with no sources, dressed up with the academic veneer of Douglas Murray. And when it comes to understanding the current situation in Israel and Palestine, I don't think that you can solely blame the far right in Israel, because Israeli society has long been spiraling towards expelling and exterminating the Palestinians. But what I will say is that to not mention Itamar Ben-Gvir or Israel's finance minister Bezalel Smotrich in a book called On Democracies and Death Cults, where you claim over and over again that it is Palestinians who don't want peace because they are unwilling to stop killing Jewish people, when Bezalel Smotrich was publishing a plan about expelling, subjugating and killing Palestinians in the late 2010s, and he is now Israel's finance minister. How is this worth reading? It's just not. I actually don't think I can find a single example of Douglas Murray talking about Smotrich or Ben-Gvir ever. And the same goes for the topic of famine and starvation. Douglas Murray seems to not want to talk about this. There is one video where he does the classic Zionist talking point of saying that the aid is actually being stolen by Hamas. And I mean, this was farcical at the time, but look at the reality right now. Israel has literally denied any aid from entering the entire Gaza Strip for
because if they would, Hamas would steal it. That's the argument, right? It's bullshit. Israel has also directed different gangs inside of the Gaza Strip to disrupt the aid delivery process. Gangs that are well armed, gangs that actually evade despite being well armed, gangs that actually evade drone strikes for some reason. I mean, think about it. Israel has conducted killing fields inside of the Gaza Strip. They're so bloodthirsty that they literally kill their own soldiers. They're so bloodthirsty they kill Israeli hostages that are waving a white flag. They're so bloodthirsty that they kill World Central Kitchen aid workers, journalists, their whole families, virtually everybody. And yet, for some strange reason, whenever these drones are flying around, these gangs get to work and steal aid. Now, ironically enough, when they actually get to work and try to steal aid, Hamas, or the civil governance division, what remains of the civil governance division of the police force that hasn't been assassinated, will actually implement a curfew. 9 p.m. curfew was implemented by Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Okay? They actually caught the people that were participating in these activities, and they killed them. They executed them. And yet, the very next day, Israel will then find the people that executed the thieves and will kill them with drone strikes, defending them.
Over 2 months now, and yet we are meant to believe that the aid actually was being stolen and that Israel was allowing aid to flow in. There is nowhere else like this in the world where there are...
How is the Israeli government so evil? How does no other nation step in? Because other nations are also just as evil. They don't care. I mean, dude, in terms of moral depravity, it's an endless well. Israel is an endless well of moral depravity here. I mean, this is the greatest example of this. There are things that Israel does that sound so insane, says Izzy Breen. People don't believe that they do it, even after they watch videos with it, videos of them doing it with their own eyes. One of those things is the quadcopters that play children's screams over their speakers to take pot shots at civilians who walk slowly. This is from a Palestinian in Gaza. The sounds of quadcopters planes are terrifying. It makes the sound of a crying child, and it also fires direct shots. My brothers and I are scared. We don't want to die. I covered these quadcopters a year ago. They've been using them.
There are piles and piles of aid just over a tiny barrier that could go to people but is being denied to them as a weapon of war used by a government. And Douglas Murray, again, does not think that that is evil. He thinks that that is what a democracy looks like against a death cult. It's ridiculous. And I think that one of the key reasons that Douglas Murray doesn't mention people like Itamar Ben-Gvir or Bezalel Smotrich ever is because I think this guy might agree with them. Throughout the book, he interchanges the terms the West Bank and Judea and Samaria. Now, if you don't know what the term Judea and Samaria is, it is the Hebrew term to refer to the West Bank, and it gained popularity in the 1970s. And this was when Menachem Begin, the first Israeli prime minister that did not belong to the Labour Party, won an election, and he would always refer to the West Bank as Judea and Samaria. And the reason that he did this was to justify its annexation. And Douglas Murray does this in his book. He has been doing it since October the 7th, and probably long before. He constantly says, well, it prevents rocket fire at Israel. But does it really? He constantly tries to make outrageous claims about the Palestinian Authority. And if you are interested in seeing me debunk the things Douglas Murray has to say about the Palestinian Authority, an organisation that is largely benevolent to Israel, go and check out this old video on my channel. He also justifies Israel's apartheid wall that it built in the West Bank, saying that it has stopped violence against Israelis. Well, it certainly hasn't stopped violence against Palestinians. If you actually claim that you want an equitable solution, how on earth can you claim that an apartheid wall, which annexed vast swathes of Palestinian territory, segmented Palestinian towns and cut them off from each other, is some kind of acceptable thing? Because it only really stopped violence against Jewish people, and even this wasn't as a whole. But for Palestinians, the situation in the West Bank since this apartheid wall was erected has only gotten worse. These are not the words of some moderate who is interested in peace, and it just shows you why you can't trust him. And of course, Murray doesn't explain where Palestinian violence comes from, because he wants to convince his audience that it is because they are in a death cult, that they just hate Jewish people for no reason, that they teach their children it. I mean, he said that the Palestinians should be given one school, and if they could teach their children not to hate Jewish people, then they would get more.
Say, well, what is your plan? I was saying it's slightly sarcastic, but not entirely, which is give the Palestinians one thing to run, give them one school to run and see if they can do it. See if that one school can avoid teaching to kill the Jews. See if that one school can actually teach maths and arithmetic and literature and reading and writing.
This is yet another inaccurate and ridiculous comment, because the literacy rate of people in Gaza is incredibly high. People love to cite a dubious study about people in Gaza having a low IQ, but all the other indicators suggest otherwise. People in Gaza are highly educated. Murray claiming that Palestinians cannot run a school without teaching their children to hate Jewish people is ridiculous, because if Israel didn't have an occupation, if it hadn't expelled 750,000 Palestinians in 1948 and came as the Zionist project with the explicit goal of marginalizing and expelling the Palestinian people, then Palestinians wouldn't feel disdain for
Yeah, Gaza has a higher literacy rate than the United States of America. Don't forget that.
the state of Israel. And this is another thing that Murray did constantly through the Joe Rogan interview.
Since you're interested in the question of the Palestinian state, the Palestinians were given another state in 2005, when every single Jew was removed from the Gaza by the IDF, and when even the graves of Israelis in Gaza were dug up and taken into the rest of Israel.
He said things like this about how the people of Gaza had actually had a state, but he could never avow whether there was a two-state solution or not. And this is just an utterly ridiculous comment. The people of the Gaza Strip did not get a state in 2005 because Israel has always retained control over its air, land, and sea borders. They have continually shot fishermen who go fishing in the Gaza Strip, even though under the Oslo Accords they are meant to allow them to fish up to 12 nautical miles. Israel just shoots them way closer to the Gaza Strip. They have continually prevented Palestinians from exploiting the offshore gas field worth in excess of $4 billion in 2004 near the Gaza Strip. They have never let Palestinians have a fair chance at it. Moreover, you constantly hear rubbish and slop from propagandists like Douglas Murray that the Gaza Strip could have been like Singapore. And of course, the blockade has played a key part of this. But as Sarah Roy has noted, the de-development of the Gaza Strip occurred long before this. And an article from 1955 talks about how Gaza, after the Nakba, would have always struggled to support the population because it is isolated from the rest of the world. And the population has only increased exponentially since this point. So once again, this is just slop. It's not real. It doesn't account for any of the context of what's happening in Palestine. It's just talking points for people who can't be bothered to do any research or reading. And Douglas likes to say, well, there were beautiful shopping malls and people had expensive luxury cars in the Gaza Strip prior to October the 7th. Is this really all that surprising? Hamas are capitalists. The Gaza Strip has an economy. It may have been failing, but it doesn't change the fact that there are always going to be elites.
Also, the notion that they're like billionaires is so stupid. I hate that argument. Like, oh, every Hamas leader is actually a billionaire. It's like, okay, dude, sure. Like, yeah. What's funny about it is like they'll be like, oh, Hamas leadership is billionaires. It's like, bro, Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in Tehran. Okay, Yahya Sinwar was killed in a bombed out building, fighting till his very last breath. Like, what are we talking about? The idea that these guys are like billionaires sheltered from the violence of Israel is ridiculous. Like they'll always try to say this, but like it's a way to try and shut off aid. They'll be like, oh, they're billionaires because like all the aid that goes into the Gaza Strip, which amounts to billions basically, which is like almost the collective total of the collective total of like the Gazan GDP basically. And they claim that these guys are wealthier than like all of the aid that's entering Gaza in a way to basically shut off aid into Gaza.
elites and upper classes within any society. The exact same happens in the West Bank. In Ramallah, there is a small class associated with the Palestinian Authority who have enriched themselves considerably by collaborating with Israel's occupation. Does this mean that they are not oppressed because some people are rich there? Does this mean that life is fantastic in the West Bank? Of course it doesn't, and only a fool would believe this. As I said, Murray's book is not serious scholarship. It is not an academic piece of work. It is slop. He says that the Arabs have proven that they are unable to tolerate Jews. He does the classic thing of saying, well, it's the Arabs who really do apartheid against Jewish people. And Murray waves away any claims of Israel's apartheid regime by telling us that there are actually Arabs in the Israeli Knesset and on the Israeli national football team. And just like Ethan Klein, what Douglas Murray fails to mention is that what those Palestinian citizens of Israel actually have to say is that the Israeli government is not treating them fairly, that they are second-class citizens. Israel's government openly announces that it is a state for Jewish people. It is an ethno-supremacist project, and it is a project which has never ever had any interest in including the Palestinian people. I detailed this in my video debunking Lonerbox. You can watch it here, how the early Zionists had no interest in working with the Palestinians. They wanted to expel them. But unlike liberal Zionists like Ethan Klein, Douglas Murray is so extreme that he cannot even admit that there is apartheid in the West Bank, East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. He doesn't think that that bears mentioning, the torturous and horrifying conditions inflicted onto Palestinians. Now, as I said, Nathan J. Robinson's article on this is absolutely excellent, but some of the things that he highlights about Douglas Murray's book are actually unbelievable, coming from a guy who described himself as an expert a couple of weeks ago, because one of the examples that he gives is how Douglas Murray ripped a quote from Twitter from a random faceless Twitter account and said that it came from Ismail Haniyeh. It's not serious, it's not proper scholarly work, that's utter rubbish. As Robinson notes, if you have been to university, you would literally be marked down for that. You would not be able to achieve the highest grade. They would tell you that that is terrible practice because the quote doesn't even seem to have an actual source. It is just something someone decided to put on Twitter. And there are so many other just Zionist slop talking points in here. He claims that the Hamas members are billionaires, citing only one New York Post article, a tabloid newspaper. Not exactly scrupulous now, is it? And you also have the fact that he claims that Sinwar's wife had a $32,000 Birkin bag. It's just not true either. And this is meant to be the expert on this that we should trust because of his expertise and having been there. And it shows you the lack of skill that you have to become a Zionist propagandist, because this guy is literally one of the most esteemed and decorated Zionist propagandists. And another example highlighted by Robinson is that Murray spreads this talking point that one of the people with Sinwar when he was killed was actually a member of UNRWA, that he had a passport and loads of cash on him ready to flee. This also is not true. The person's passport, who it was, had left Gaza. He posted on Facebook saying, I was not with Sinwar, that he was alive after Sinwar was killed. And yet you have Douglas Murray just saying this. How can you trust this guy? And another uncited claim that Douglas Murray made on the Joe Rogan podcast, which was particularly ridiculous, was the claim that the reason for the extensive destruction in the Gaza Strip is because of house-to-house fighting and the fact that almost every house is booby-trapped, so the IOF just had to blow them all up.
When you talk about the destruction in the Gaza, something you probably haven't realized, but is one of the reasons why the destruction looks so bad and is so bad, is because when the IDF were clearing the areas that they'd asked the civilian population to leave and were going house to house, it's every second or third house in Gaza that has either munitions or tunnel entrances. Everybody who has been there knows is that you go into a mosque and you know there will be either rockets and or tunnel entrances. You go into a hospital and you know that there will be grenades or tunnel entrances or dungeons or whatever.
This is actually a claim which Lonerbox made very similarly when he was trying to debunk Noah Samson.
They're trying to combat the idea that Hamas militarizes all this infrastructure, and that the reason so many buildings get destroyed is because, like, how do you think Hamas fights?
Bro, every single person that defends Israel has the exact same talking points, neatly aligned. And they have to, because there's no real way of defending genocide to people that are equipped to think that genocide is unconscionable. So, like, this is the best you can do. You get the best possible talking points and you regurgitate them like NPCs and hope that dumbasses that actually watch you are not smart enough to recognize that these are silly-ass talking points. That's it. Do you watch More Pegasus videos on you? What? Who is this? What is More Pegasus? No, I don't know, man. I don't know what the fuck More Pegasus is, okay? Please stop spamming in the chat. I don't know. I don't know who that is or what that is.
How do you think any urban war happens?
And this is, by the way, something that I've started to notice. The supposedly pro-Palestine loner box actually repeats a lot of Douglas Murray talking points. However, the reality of the destruction in the Gaza Strip is different to many other contexts, because the reason for such extensive destruction in many different places is an ideological religious fanaticism practiced by many Israeli soldiers. You have videos where Palestinian homes are burnt down and destroyed for Jewish religious festivals. You have the example of where the Al-Aqsa University Library was burnt down for a photo op for Israeli soldiers, a recent one where Palestinian homes were blown up for a gender reveal. And other examples where buildings like the Turkish Cancer Hospital, which had been used as a military base, granted, was blown up, but it was used as a military base by the Israeli military, not Hamas, not Palestinian Islamic Jihad. It was Israel who used it as a military base and then blew it up. And yet you have people like Lona Box and Douglas Murray claiming that the reason for this destruction is because of the way that they've been fighting. Of course, Hamas undeniably used booby traps, but it's also clear that the Israeli military have been implementing a systemic policy of wiping away Palestinian culture, history, agricultural land, and society. They are perpetrating genocide. They don't want Palestinians to be able to exist in Palestine. This is why they're doing these things. It's not some necessity of war. I mean, Yunus Tarawi, the Palestinian journalist, has some of the most extensive reporting on this. He dropped an article in late 2024 about how companies from the West Bank that normally build settlements were employing Israeli civilians to go into the Gaza Strip just to demolish homes for the sake of it. Religious fanatics clearing the land for Jewish settlement. Louis Theroux's recent BBC documentary also noted this. He spoke with Daniela Weiss, a key leader of the settler movement, who was talking about settling the Gaza Strip. They are wiping away Gaza because of their plan to ethnically cleanse and genocide the Palestinian people so that Jewish settlement can occur in Gaza. To sit there and pretend that this is comparable to other situations is really ridiculous because of that. Because the destruction is not because of military necessity, it is because they're doing genocide. All of those photo ops and videos where Israeli soldiers stand in front of burning homes and take pictures show you that this is not because of military necessity. They have destroyed for fun, in revenge, and because of their ideological commitment to wiping away the Palestinian people. And there's also one final thing that I would like to note in this section, which is really comical from his book, which is when he brings up a quote from an Israeli talking about how Hamas shooting an ambulance on October the 7th was an act of pure barbaric evil. Well, obviously, since Douglas Murray has published his book, the Israelis massacred 15 aid workers, crushed up ambulances, but this is also part of a wider systemic pattern of not only Israelis targeting healthcare, dressing up as doctors to go and assassinate Palestinians, but you also have the fact that Israel has a long history of targeting ambulances, and it just shows you how all of the stuff Murray is saying is just complete and utter nonsense. Now this...
It's projection. That's the craziest part about it, is that like everything Israel says Hamas is doing, Israel actually is doing, and Hamas is not doing. That's what's so wild about this. It's not only pure propaganda, it's not even made up. It's just the side that's doing it is saying that the side they're doing it to is actually doing it.
This is where I'll leave the video, because the amount of hateful rhetoric that Douglas Murray has spewed is impossible to debunk in one video. Over and over again, Murray has been offered platforms, in spite of the fact that, as Matthew Jameson put it, he has a perverse and deranged...
Like, down to the human shield shit. Like, the Israeli courts had to discontinue the practice of the Israeli occupying force in using human shields, which they still use to this day. They use Palestinians as literal human shields. They will take Palestinian children in the West Bank in their operations and put them in front of the soldiers. There's videos, there's footage of Palestinian children being slammed onto the hood of a car, of an Israeli occupying force armored vehicle. There are a ton of firsthand accounts from Israeli soldiers, as a matter of fact, in Israeli media, about how they had the regular practice of taking Palestinian civilians, stripping them, sometimes actually putting them in IDF fatigues, and then sending them down the tunnels or sending them into areas where they think there are booby traps. There are countless amounts of photos and videos of this practice. So the idea that Israel claims that Hamas is actually using human shields, and that's why the civilian casualty numbers are so high, is not only ridiculous, but also they are the ones doing it, as always.
Obsession with everything Islam, and I don't think that Jameson is wrong. Yet Douglas Murray was allowed to host Piers Morgan's show whilst Morgan was on holiday. He's constantly on Sky News Australia. He was on
Even down to the fact that Israel will say, like, people who criticize Israel. But yeah, even down to the fact that Israel defenders will say all of Israel's enemies are terrorists and terrorist supporters. And no, Israel is the terrorist entity here. Israel is the one terrorizing the Palestinian civilian population. Israel is the one that's engaging in a genocide. And defenders of Israel are the terrorism defenders.
on the BBC, Times Radio, the Joe Rogan podcast, everywhere. This man is a vile extremist who has no expertise and has spent an entire year embedded with the military, who not only is perpetrating genocide in my eyes and the eyes of so many different experts, esteemed scholars in genocide studies, now Josep Borrell, the former chief of the European Union, who has said it now that he no longer has his mandate. Murray is a shill for a state whose leaders are wanted at the International Criminal Court, and he is still allowed to appear on television. It is really indicative of the point that society has reached. This man is a dangerous extremist, and his views and his hatred of Palestinians needs to be dealt with. He needs to be removed from the air and blacklisted. But of course, this just isn't going to happen, because whilst the British government might pretend that they don't hold the same beliefs as Douglas Murray, that they don't agree with starving and exterminating people, they don't lift a finger to stop it. And that's what the difference is between Douglas Murray and a liberal Zionist who runs away from the excessive violence of Israel. Murray embraces it. Murray revels in it. Yeah. Murray adores it. He constantly speaks about the brave IOF, how the Western people should all learn from the Israeli military and what they do. He is a creepy and sadistically evil man.
When you think of pop culture icons like Albert Einstein.
Anyway, I'm gonna end it here. My mom is here. I'm gonna hang out with her. Sorry for the half day. It's a half day, I know.